Okay, PTSD. The code is F43.10. And there is a separate set of criteria for children age 6 years and younger. So this is several pages. I'm going to hit the major criteria and then the one for children, but then I'll go back over the major criteria for adults and just kind of stick with that because the specifiers for children are insane and like a page and a half. Okay. Specifiers for adults are pretty simple. You specify if it's with dissociative symptoms, and then you sub-specify depersonalization or derealization, and then you also specify if it's with delayed expression. Now, for kids age 6 years old and younger, so that's all the way up to 6 years, 11 months, and however many days, there are lots more criteria, and actually it has the same specifiers, but you have these persistence, avoidance of stimuli, negative alterations in cognitions that are like a little different, I think. So anyway, it just seems really long, the children one. Okay, so diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. It's code F43.10, and this is for individuals older than 6 years. There is a specifier if it starts 6 months after the event, and you also specify for age 6 and up. But otherwise, the duration is greater than 1 month of symptoms, and so that's good to remember, 1 month. And then you have an onset specifier. Okay. The following criteria apply to adults, adolescents, and children older than 6 years. A. Exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. So it's one of four. So the four criteria are: 1, directly experiencing the traumatic event; 2, witnessing it in person as it occurred to others; 3, learning about the traumatic event occurring with a close family member or close friend. It must have been violent or accidental. 4, experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of the traumatic event. And for this, they're talking about, like police repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse, or first responders picking up human remains, stuff like that. Criterion A4, that's the experiencing repeated and extreme exposure to aversive details of traumatic events, does not apply to being exposed on TV, movies, pictures, electronic media, unless you're having to watch this over and over and over for work-related reasons. So, the short version of criteria A is exposure to actual or threats of death, serious injury, sexual violence in one of four: directly experiencing, witnessing in person, learning about it happening to a close family member or close friend, and it has to be violent or accidental, actual or threatened death; or 4, repeated extreme exposure to aversive details, such as with work. For B, you need to have one of 5. So the presence of one or more of the following intrusion symptoms are associated with the traumatic event beginning after it occurred. So A is the exposure and B is the intrusion. 1, recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the events. And this says in children older than 6 years, repetitive play may occur in which themes or aspects of the traumatic event are expressed. 2, recurrent, distressing dreams in which the content or affect of the dream are related to the traumatic event. Again, in children, there could be frightening dreams without recognizing the content. 3, dissociative reactions, a flashback or something like that, in which the individual feels or acts as if the traumatic events were occurring. These reactions may occur on a continuum, with the most extreme expression being a complete loss of awareness of present surroundings. And in children, those trauma-specific reenactments could occur in play. 4, intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. And 5, marked physiological reactions to the external or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect, like shaking. Excuse me, like shaking or something. Okay, so the intrusive is one of 5 of those 5 things. And then C, is the persistence avoidance of stimuli associated with traumatic events, beginning after the traumatic events occurred, evidenced by one or both of the following. So it's at least one of these 2. Avoidance of or efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with the event. Or 2, avoidance of or efforts to avoid external reminders, people, places, or conversations, activities, objects, or situations that arouse distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with the traumatic event. D, negative alterations in cognition and mood associated with the traumatic events, beginning or worsening after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by 2 of the following 7. So 2 of 7. An inability to remember an important aspect of the traumatic event, which is typically due to like dissociative amnesia, not like a head injury or something. 2, persistent or exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about oneself, others, or the world, such as I'm bad, no one can be trusted, the world's dangerous, I'm ruined. 3, persistent distorted cognitions about the cause or consequences of the traumatic event that lead the individual to blame him or herself or others. 4, persistently negative emotional state, such as fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. 5, markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities. 6, feelings of detachment or estrangement from others. 7, persistent inability to experience positive emotions, such as an inability to experience happiness, satisfaction, or loving feelings. Okay, E is marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic event, beginning or worsening after the traumatic event occurred, and that's 2 of 6. So here's the 6. You need at least 2 of these. Irritable behavior and angry outbursts with little or no provocation, typically expressed as verbal or physical aggression towards people or objects. 2, reckless or self-destructive behavior. 3, hypervigilance. 4, exaggerated startle response. 5, problems with concentration. And 6, sleep disturbance. For example, trouble falling or staying asleep or restless sleep. F, the duration of the disturbance in criteria B, C, D, and E is more than a month. And G, the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. H, the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition, so not drugs or an illness. And then you have specifiers, and that's with dissociative symptoms. So they meet criteria for PTSD, and in addition, in response to the stressor, the individual experiences persistent or recurrent symptoms of either depersonalization or derealization. Depersonalization is persistent or recurrent experiences of feeling detached from and as if one were an outside observer of one's mental processes or body, feeling like you're moving slowly or you're in a dream. Or derealization, which is persistent or recurrent experiences of unreality of surroundings. The world feels unreal, dreamlike, distant, or distorted. If you use the specifier with dissociative symptoms, they can't be attributable to a substance or a medical condition. So, not a seizure or a blackout or being drunk or something. You also can specify with delayed expression, and that's where the criteria for PTSD are not met until at least 6 months after the event. So the onset of expression of some symptoms could be immediate, but you might not have met full criteria until at least 6 months after. And so that's PTSD with delayed expression. And there can also be PTSD with dissociative symptoms, depersonalization, PTSD with dissociative symptoms, derealization. Okay, for children 6 years or younger, you still have the same main criteria, right? You have to directly experience it, witness it in person as it occurred to others, or learn that it occurred to a parent or caregiver. So you need one of those three in criteria A for the exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. And then B, you only have to have one of 5 of the intrusion symptoms associated with the event. So 1, recurrent involuntary or intrusive distressing memories. And it says it might be expressed as play. 2, recurrent or distressing dreams where the content or the affect are related. And then it says you might not be able to tell. They could just be scared. 3, dissociative reactions like flashbacks. And these can occur in play. 4, intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to triggers, right? Internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect. And 5, a marked physiological reaction to reminders of the traumatic event. I mean, screaming, crying, running, hitting, kicking, hiding under the table, going under the desk, trying to leave school, running off, those kinds of things are a physiological reaction. Shaking, trembling, that kind of stuff. C, one or more of the following symptoms which represent persistence avoidance of stimuli or negative alterations in cognitions. So, persistence avoidance or negative alterations, you only need one of 6 across either of the 2 categories. So that's different than adults. So the persistence avoidance ones are avoiding the activities, places, or physical reminders. And 2, avoidance or efforts to avoid people, conversations, or interpersonal situations. So it can be either one of those, or it could be one of the 4 that go along with negative alterations in cognitions, which is increased frequency of negative emotional states like fear, guilt, sadness, shame, confusion. Diminished interest or participation in activities, including constricted play, socially withdrawn behavior, or persistent reduction in expressive of positive emotions. So if they just have a really flat affect and they're not very positive anymore. D, alterations in arousal or reactivity associated with the event, and it's 2 out of these 5, which is irritable behavior or angry outbursts with little to no provocation, including extreme temper tantrums. 2, hypervigilance. 3, exaggerated startle response. 4, problems with concentration. 5, sleep disturbance. E, the duration again is more than a month. F, the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in relationships with parents, siblings, peers, or other caregivers, or with their school behavior. So it's like the kid version of the other functional behavioral impact thing. And G, the disturbance is not attributable to a substance or another medical condition. And they have the same specifiers. And delayed expression is still 6 or more months after the event. So I'm just going to go over the main criteria for post-traumatic stress because I can't imagine any of us want to memorize this. So PTSD is coded as F43.10, and criteria A is exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. And it's got a bunch of ways that can happen. B, you have intrusive symptoms, 1 out of 5. C, you persistently avoid stuff associated with the trauma, and that's 1 of 2. D, you have a change for the worse in the way you're thinking or feeling around the traumatic event, and that's 2 of 7. And then E, you have an alteration in how you are either feeling reactive or your arousal level, and that's 2 of 6. The duration is more than a month for all of those things. And G, the disturbance causes the clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, and it's not due to a substance or a medical condition. You can have it with dissociative symptoms, which are either being depersonalized or derealized, and it can be a delayed expression if it happens 6 months after the event. So those main criteria, again, are exposure to the trauma, intrusive symptoms, avoidance of stimuli, negative cognition or mood, alteration in reactivity or arousal, such as, hypervigilance, startle response, stuff like that. It lasts for more than a month, and it causes significant distress or impairment in important areas of functioning. And that is PTSD. Hopefully we don't need to know it's 43.10.